The coronation was only 3 days away when Thomas Reed found something that would change everything. He had been a royal guard for 17 years. Checking the ceremonial robes was routine, boring even. But protocol was protocol. Every stitch, every seam, every fold had to be examined before the king could wear them. Thomas ran his gloved hand along the crimson velvet. The fabric was cold to the touch, heavy. It smelled like old museums and forgotten time. He checked the golden embroidery. Perfect. The jeweled buttons. Secure. Everything seemed fine. Then, his fingers caught on something, Bump. Small. Hidden in the thick lining near the left shoulder. Thomas froze. His training kicked in. Anything unusual was a threat. He carefully turned the robe inside out under the bright examination lights. The white silk lining looked flawless, but his fingers found it again. Definitely something there. He grabbed a seam ripper from the inspection kit. His hands were steady, but his heart was not. With delicate precision, he opened a small section of the lining. A piece of paper fell onto the velvet cushion below. It was old, yellow, folded into a tight square, no bigger than his thumb. The edges were brown with age. Thomas picked it up with tweezers. His breath caught as he carefully unfolded it under the magnifying lamp. Strange symbols covered the paper, characters he didn't recognize at first. Then he saw them. 2 words written in red ink, or what he hoped was ink. Zhuo Thomas didn't speak Chinese, but something about those characters made his skin crawl. The way they were written, harsh, angry, like someone had pressed the brush so hard it nearly tore the paper. Before you keep watching, make sure you're subscribed. You won't believe what this note actually says, and what happens next will shock you. Hit that subscribe button now. Thomas immediately called his supervisor. Within 20 minutes, the small examination room was filled with people. Security chiefs, palace historians, even the head of royal protocol, a stern woman named Margaret Forsyth, who never showed emotion. She showed emotion now. Her face went pale when she saw the note. She held it up to the light with trembling fingers. Then she looked at Thomas with eyes that held something he'd never seen in her before. Fear. Double quotes, where exactly was this? She whispered. Thomas pointed to the open seam in the lining. Hidden there, near the shoulder. Someone sewed it in deliberately. Margaret turned to the head of security. We need a translator, immediately, and a forensics team. What does it say? Thomas asked. Margaret didn't answer. She was staring at the crimson robe spread across the table like a body. Her lips moved silently, as if she were praying. Margaret, the security chief pressed. Do you know what this is? She finally spoke. Her voice was barely audible. It's happened before. The room went silent. What's happened before? Thomas demanded. Margaret set the note down carefully, as if it might explode. She looked around at the faces watching her. Then she said the words that would start everything. 60 years ago, 3 days before the last coronation, someone found a note just like this. Same symbols. Same red ink. Same location in the robes. She paused, swallowed hard. King Edward wore those robes anyway. He died on the throne during the ceremony. The doctor said it was a heart attack. But there were no medical warnings. No previous conditions. He was 43 years old and perfectly healthy. Thomas felt his blood turn to ice. What do those symbols mean? He asked, though part of him didn't want to know. Margaret looked at the note one more time. They mean curse. Asterisk. The palace went into lockdown mode within the hour. Dr. Sarah Chen arrived just after midnight. She was a forensic document analyst and one of the best in the country. But when security escorted her into the sealed examination room, even she looked unsettled. Show me, she said simply. Thomas watched as Dr. Chen put on specialized gloves and positioned the note under a high-powered microscope. She worked in silence for nearly 30 minutes. The only sounds were the hum of equipment and her occasional sharp intake of breath. Finally, she leaned back. Her expression was troubled. The paper is handmade. Rice paper. probably Japanese or Chinese origin. The fibers show it's at least 60 to 80 years old. Maybe older. She adjusted the microscope. But here's what's strange. Everyone leaned in closer. The ink. Dr. Chen pointed to the screen showing a magnified view of the characters. It's not standard calligraphy ink. The chemical composition includes iron oxide, tannic acid, and something else. Something organic. What does that mean? Margaret asked. Dr. Chen met her eyes. This type of ink was historically used for very specific purposes. Cursing, hexing, dark ritual work. The organic component is likely blood. Human blood mixed with traditional ink. Thomas felt his stomach turn. He'd held that note with his bare hands before grabbing the tweezers. There's more, Dr. Chen continued. She pulled up another image. Under UV light, there are additional characters. Hidden writing that's only visible under specific wavelengths. The screen showed more symbols appearing like ghosts on the paper. An entire paragraph of text that had been invisible to the naked eye. A translator was brought in. Professor Ming Li, an expert in ancient Chinese scripts and historical documents. He was a small man in his 70s with thick glasses and gentle hands. But when he read the note, his gentle demeanor vanished. This is very old-style writing, he said slowly. Very formal, very serious. He traced the characters with a finger that didn't quite touch the paper. The visible words, Zuzhou, they mean curse, yes. But the hidden text underneath, he trailed off, removed his glasses. Cleaned them, even though they weren't dirty, Professor Margaret prompted. We need to know. Professor Li put his glasses back on. He looked tired suddenly. Much older than his 70 years. It's a death curse. Very specific. Very detailed. He pulled out a notepad and began writing the translation. It says, "The false king who wears these robes stained with innocent blood will not survive to see the crown upon his head. His heart will stop. His breath will cease. Justice will be served before the eyes of God and men." The room erupted in overlapping voices. Security wanted to cancel the coronation. Historians wanted to investigate. Palace officials wanted to keep everything quiet, but Thomas was watching Professor Li. The old man was still staring at the note. His lips were moving silently again, reading something they couldn't see. "There's more, isn't there?" Thomas asked quietly. Professor Li nodded slowly. At the bottom, one more line. It says, "This curse cannot be broken by mortal means. Only truth can set the innocent free." Margaret sank into a chair. King Edward. It really was the curse. "We don't know that," the head of security said firmly. "Correlation isn't causation. He had a heart attack. It happens." At the exact moment predicted by a cursed note hidden in his robes, Margaret shot back. Dr. Chen interrupted them. "There's something else you need to see." She pulled up the analysis of the stitching that had held the note in place. This thread. It's modern. Very modern. This note wasn't placed in the robes 60 years ago. Everyone froze. "What are you saying?" Thomas asked. Dr. Chen's voice was measured but certain. "I'm saying someone removed this note from King Edward's robes 60 years ago, and someone recently sewed it back into the current king's coronation robes. Within the last 6 months, implications hit like a physical blow. Someone inside the palace had done this. Someone with access to the royal wardrobe. Someone who knew the history. Someone who wanted the new king dead. And they were still here. Still watching? Still waiting?" Margaret stood up abruptly. "We need to tell His Majesty. Now." But Thomas was thinking about something else. Something Professor Li had said. The false king. Innocent blood. Only truth can set the innocent free. What truth? What had happened 60 years ago that was still reaching forward to kill kings today? King William sat in his private study listening to the report. He was 56 years old, with silver hair and the kind of face that looked like it had been carved for coins. He listened without interrupting, without showing any reaction at all. When they finished, he was quiet for a long time. "My father," he finally said. His voice was steady, but something moved behind his eyes. You're saying my father was murdered by a curse? You're saying the circumstances are highly unusual? Your Majesty, Margaret said carefully. A piece of paper killed him. The king's tone was flat, unreadable. The paper itself couldn't harm anyone, Dr. Chen explained. But the psychological impact, if he had known about it, could have caused extreme stress. Stress can trigger cardiac events. Did he know? The king asked. Did my father see the note before he died? The room went silent. No one had an answer. King William stood and walked to the window. Outside, the palace gardens were dark, except for security lights. I was 8 years old. I watched him die. He was standing right there at the altar. He looked at my mother, smiled, then he just stopped, fell, like someone had cut his strings. He turned back to face them. I've spent 48 years trying to understand that moment. And now you're telling me someone planned it? Someone wanted it. Someone made it happen, Your Majesty, the head of security said firmly. We need to postpone the coronation. For your safety, no? Sir. Someone inside the palace, I said no. The king's voice was sharp now, royal. If we postpone, we show fear. We show that a piece of paper has power over the crown. I won't do that. Margaret stepped forward. The curse mentions innocent blood, a false king. William, there might be something about your father's reign. Something that my father was a good man. The king cut her off. He was beloved. There were no scandals, no accusations, nothing that would warrant this kind of hatred. But Thomas noticed something. The way the king's hand had clenched when Margaret mentioned innocent blood, the slight change in his breathing. Your Majesty, Thomas said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. A guard didn't usually speak directly to the king, but something was pulling at Thomas's mind. Did anything unusual happen right before your father's coronation? Anything that was covered up or forgotten? The king's jaw tightened. He looked at Thomas for a long moment. Then he walked to his desk and unlocked a drawer. He pulled out an old photograph. This was in my father's personal effects. I found it after he died. I've kept it all these years, but never knew what it meant. He laid the photograph on the desk. Everyone gathered around. It showed a young woman. Maybe 20 years old? Beautiful. She was wearing traditional Chinese dress and standing in front of the palace gates. On the back, written in faded ink, was a date. March 15th, 1965. 3 months before King Edward's coronation. And a name Li Mei. Professor Li gasped. His hand flew to his mouth. What? Margaret demanded. Do you know her? Professor Li's eyes were wet. His voice shook. Li Mei? She was my sister. The room exploded with questions. But Professor Li held up his hand. He seemed to be gathering strength for something terrible. I need to tell you a story, he said quietly. A story that the royal family buried 60 years ago. A story I've been afraid to speak out loud my entire life. King William sank into his chair. His face had gone gray. You know, the king whispered. You already know. Professor Li nodded slowly. Your father and my sister. They were in love. He wanted to marry her. But the family said no. A Chinese immigrant wasn't suitable for a king. They forbade it. What happened to her? Dr. Chen asked gently. Professor Li's hands were shaking now. She was pregnant, she told your father. Begged him to stand up to the family. To choose her and their child. He looked at King William with infinite sadness. He chose the crown instead. The words hung in the air like poison. My sister wrote him letters. Dozens of letters. She was desperate, alone, terrified. He never responded. The family had her, removed from the city, paid her to disappear, threatened her if she ever spoke about the relationship. Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. What happened to the baby? Professor Li closed his eyes. She died giving birth. She was alone in a charity hospital. No family, no money, no support. She was 21 years old. He opened his eyes. They were full of tears and something much darker. The baby died with her. Thomas felt like he'd been punched. Innocent blood. The false king. It all made terrible sense. The curse, Thomas said. Did she write it? Professor Lee shook his head. My sister couldn't write traditional script. She was just a simple girl. His voice hardened. But I could. I was studying classical Chinese. I was young and angry and destroyed by grief. I wrote that curse the night she died. I sewed it into the coronation robes 3 days before the ceremony. He looked directly at King William. I murdered your father. Not with my hands, but with my words and my hatred and my pain, and I'm not sorry. Security moved toward Professor Lee immediately. But King William raised his hand. Wait, everyone froze. The king was staring at the old professor. His face showed a dozen emotions at once. Shock, anger, grief, and something else. Something that looked almost like understanding. You killed my father, the king said slowly. You admit this. I wrote words on paper, Professor Lee replied. His voice was steady now, resigned. Whether those words had power or not, I cannot say. But I meant them to have power. I wanted your father to pay for what he did to my sister, to his own child. Yes. Then why, the king asked quietly, did you remove the note after he died? Professor Lee blinked. Confused? I didn't. Someone did, Dr. Chen said. The note was taken from the original robes. That's why it wasn't discovered during the investigation after King Edward's death. Someone removed it to protect the family from scandal, Margaret spoke up. But if Professor Lee didn't remove it, and he's kept this secret for 60 years, then who put it back? Who sewed it into your robes, William? The implications settled over the room like snow. Someone else knew the story. Someone else wanted this secret exposed. Someone else wanted King William to face the same fate as his father. Professor Lee Thomas said carefully, in 60 years, did you ever tell anyone about this? Anyone at all? The old man thought hard. No. After King Edward died during the ceremony, I was terrified. I thought I would be discovered, arrested for murder, but no one ever found the note. I destroyed all my sister's letters. I kept silent. He paused. Except there was one person. One who already knew. Who? The king demanded. Your mother, Professor Lee whispered. Queen Eleanor. She knew about the affair. She knew about Li Mei. She was the one who paid my sister to leave. Who threatened her? Who told King Edward he had to choose? Margaret gasped. Eleanor is still alive. She's in the royal residence. King William stood abruptly. She's 84 years old. She couldn't have known, Thomas interrupted. His mind was racing. But she could have told someone. Someone close to her. Someone who would want to protect her legacy. Or someone who thought the truth should finally come out. The king's face went pale. Catherine. Who's Catherine? Dr. Chen asked. My mother's private secretary, the king said. His voice was hollow. She's been with her for 40 years. She's fiercely loyal. Fiercely protective. She was. He stopped. Looked at Professor Lee. She was with my mother the day before my father's coronation. I remember because she was new then, young. My mother was very upset that day. Crying Catherine stayed with her all night. Margaret was already on her phone, calling security. Find Catherine Walsh immediately. Detain her for questioning. But Thomas was thinking about something else. The note had said, only truth can set the innocent free. Professor Lee, Thomas said urgently. The hidden text. The part about truth? What exactly did you write? Professor Lee closed his eyes, remembering. This curse cannot be broken by mortal means. Only truth can set the innocent free. Let the world know what was done in darkness. Let justice be served in the light. You wanted the truth to come out, Thomas said. You wanted everyone to know what happened to your sister? Yes, Professor Lee admitted. I was 23 and broken with grief. I wanted the world to know that kings are not above consequences, that innocent people matter, that my sister's life meant something. The door burst open. A security officer rushed in, breathless. Sir, Catherine Walsh is gone. Her quarters are empty. But we found something. He laid a folder on the desk. Inside were dozens of documents, letters, photographs, medical records, all relating to Li Mei and her relationship with King Edward, and a handwritten note on top, in elegant script. Your Majesty, the truth must be told. Your grandmother paid me to help hide this secret 60 years ago. I was young and needed money and didn't understand what I was doing. But Queen Eleanor confessed everything to me on her deathbed last month. She begged me to make it right, to let the truth out before you took the throne, built on innocent blood. I put the curse back where it belonged, not to kill you, but to stop the coronation until you face what your family did. The curse said only truth can break it. So I'm giving you the truth. Tell the world what happened to Li Mei. Acknowledge her. Acknowledge the child. Make their deaths mean something. Only then should you become king. Catherine Walsh the king sank back into his chair. He looked at the photograph of Li Mei young, beautiful, dead at 21. She died alone, he said quietly, carrying my half-sibling, and my father let it happen. Chose his crown over their lives. He looked up at Professor Lee, and I almost did the same thing. I was going to go through with the coronation. Ignore this. Keep it buried. Professor Lee's face was wet with tears. Your father was a good king in many ways, but he was a coward when it mattered most. Will you be different? King William stood. He was silent for a long moment. Then he picked up the phone on his desk. Give me the press secretary, he said. His voice was firm now, resolved. I need to call an emergency press conference tonight. Margaret stepped forward. William, think about this. The scandal is exactly what we need, the king interrupted. Catherine is right. The curse, said truth, sets the innocent free. My father died with this secret. I won't become king the same way. He looked at everyone in the room. At Thomas, who had found the note, at Dr. Chen, who had analyzed it, at Professor Lee, who had written it in grief and rage 60 years ago. Li Mei and her baby deserve to be remembered, King William said. They deserve justice, even if it's 60 years too late. The press conference was held at 2 in the morning. Every major news outlet in the world was watching. The announcement had simply said, King William will address urgent matters regarding the coronation. Speculation was already spreading like wildfire. Was he sick? Was there a threat? Was the coronation cancelled? No one expected the truth. King William sat at a simple desk. No crown, no formal robes. Just a man in a suit with photographs and documents spread before him. Professor Lee sat beside him. That alone was shocking enough to silence the room. The king took a breath. Then he began. 60 years ago, my father fell in love with a young woman named Li Mei. His voice was steady, but emotion leaked through. She was beautiful, kind, and she loved him deeply. But the royal family decided she wasn't suitable to be queen. They forbade the relationship. They paid her to leave. They threatened her into silence. Camera flashes went off like lightning. Reporters leaned forward. Li Mei was pregnant with my father's child, the king continued. She begged him to acknowledge her, to support her, to stand by her. He chose the throne instead. He held up the photograph of Li Mei. The camera zoomed in. Her face was broadcast across every screen in the world. She died giving birth at 21 years old. Alone, afraid, abandoned by the man who claimed to love her. The baby died with her. They were buried in an unmarked grave. No memorial, no acknowledgement, no justice. The king's voice hardened. 3 days before my father's coronation, someone hid a curse inside his ceremonial robes. A curse written in grief and rage by Li Mei's younger brother. The curse said that the false king wearing robes stained with innocent blood would not survive to see the crown on his head. Gasps rippled through the room. My father died during the coronation ceremony. Officially, it was called a heart attack. But now we know the truth. The psychological weight of what he had done, the guilt he carried, the secret he kept, it killed him just as surely as any physical weapon. King William paused. Let the words sink in. 3 days ago, that same curse was placed in my coronation robes, not to kill me, but to force the truth into the light, because the curse also said, only truth can set the innocent free. He gestured to Professor Lee. This is Professor Ming Li. He is Li Mei's brother. He wrote that curse 60 years ago, when he was a young man destroyed by grief. He has lived with this secret his entire life. Tonight, we're setting that secret free. Professor Li leaned toward the microphone. His voice was soft, but it carried. My sister was kind. She worked hard. She came to this country with nothing and built a small life. She fell in love with a man who seemed good and noble. She believed him when he said he loved her back. His voice cracked. She died believing she wasn't good enough, that she and her baby weren't worth choosing. I've spent 60 years angry at your family, angry at your father, angry at the crown itself. He looked at King William. But tonight, this man did what his father couldn't. He told the truth. He chose justice over comfort. He chose honor over reputation. The king spoke again. Tomorrow, I will visit Li Mei's grave. I will place a proper memorial. I will acknowledge her publicly as someone my father loved and wronged. I will acknowledge the child who never got to live. I am also establishing the Li Mei Foundation. It will support young women in difficult circumstances. It will provide health care, education, and protection for those who have been abandoned or abused by systems of power. Reporters were shouting questions. Cameras were everywhere. But King William held up his hand. My father wore the crown for only minutes before his death. I believe the weight of his guilt was too heavy to bear. I will not make the same mistake. I will wear the crown in 2 days as planned. But I will wear it knowing the truth has been told. The innocent have been acknowledged. The curse is broken. He stood. Professor Li stood beside him. One last thing, the king said. Catherine Walsh, my mother's former secretary, was the one who placed the curse back in the robes. She did it at my late grandmother's request, to force this truth into the open, to stop me from taking the throne on a foundation of lies and buried bodies. He looked directly into the camera. Catherine, if you're watching, thank you. You gave me a chance to be better than my father, to choose differently. I'm grateful. The press conference ended, but the world was just beginning to react. Within hours, the story was everywhere. Trending globally, people were shocked, moved, angry, sympathetic. The royal family's approval rating should have tanked. But something unexpected happened. People saw King William's honesty, his willingness to expose his family's darkest secret, his choice to honor Li Mei instead of hiding her, and they respected it. By morning, crowds had gathered outside the palace, not to protest, but to leave flowers. Thousands of bouquets, all for Li Mei, a woman whose name had been forgotten for 60 years. A woman who died believing she didn't matter now. The world knew her name. Thomas watched from the palace windows as the sun came up over an ocean of flowers. Professor Li stood beside him. The old man was crying. She would have loved this, Professor Li whispered. She always wanted to matter, to be seen. To be remembered, Thomas put a hand on the professor's shoulder. She matters now, because you never stopped loving her. And because one guard found a piece of paper and asked questions, Professor Li smiled through his tears. Perhaps the curse was never about death. Perhaps it was about truth, about justice, about making sure the innocent are never forgotten. Thomas thought about that. About Li Mei and her baby. About King Edward dying with his guilt. About King William choosing differently. Maybe some curses are just love with nowhere to go, Thomas said quietly. Professor Li nodded. Yes, maybe that's exactly what they are. The morning of the coronation was bright and cold. Thomas stood in his formal guard uniform watching preparations. The ceremony would go forward as planned, but everything had changed. The ceremonial robes had been examined one final time. The curse note was gone now, preserved in the royal archives as a piece of history. A reminder, but the robes themselves were different. Someone had added something new on the inside lining. Embroidered in gold thread were 2 names, Li Mei and Baby Li, small, private, but permanent. The king would wear them over his heart. Professor Li had been given a place of honor at the ceremony. He sat in the front row wearing a formal suit. His sister's photograph was in his breast pocket. He'd told Thomas he would carry her with him. She would finally see what a coronation looked like. Even if it was 60 years late, Catherine Walsh had turned herself in the day after the press conference. She'd been arrested, but then immediately pardoned by the king. She did what was right, he'd said. Even though it was hard, even though it could have cost her everything. That's not criminal. That's courageous. Catherine now sat with Professor Lee, two elderly people who had carried the weight of a terrible secret for decades. Finally free of it, Dr. Chen was there too. And Margaret. And dozens of others who had been pulled into this story. But the cameras were focused on someone else. In the place traditionally reserved for the Queen Mother sat an empty chair, draped in white silk. A photograph of Li Mei placed on the seat. Below it, a card that read, "Honored guest, remembered always." The symbolism was powerful. The woman who should have been queen, given her rightful place 60 years too late. The ceremony began. Trumpets sounded. The king entered wearing the crimson robes. He walked slowly, with dignity, but also with something his father never had. Peace, as the crown was lowered onto his head. Thomas watched Professor Lee. The old man was crying again, but he was also smiling. His lips moved in silent words. Perhaps a prayer, perhaps a goodbye, perhaps just relief that his sister's story had finally been told. The king took his oath. He promised to serve with honor, with justice, with truth, and when he finished, he did something no king had ever done before. He turned to face the empty chair with Li Mei's photograph, and he bowed. The entire cathedral gasped. Kings don't bow. Not to anyone. Not to anything. But King William bowed deeply to the photograph of a young Chinese immigrant who had been loved and abandoned and forgotten. "See you," he said clearly. "I honor you. I'm sorry for what was done to you." Then he straightened, turned to face his people, and became king. The ceremony continued, but everyone there knew they had witnessed something rare. Something true. A man who chose to face his family's darkness instead of hiding from it. A king who understood that real power comes from admitting wrong and choosing better. After the ceremony, there was a private moment. Just King William, Professor Lee, Thomas, and a few others. They stood in a quiet chapel. "Do you feel it?" the king asked Professor Lee quietly. "Is the curse broken?" Professor Lee thought about that. "I don't know if the curse was ever real. Not in a magical sense. But yes, I feel something lifted. My sister's death mattered. Her life mattered. She's remembered now. That's all I ever wanted." He looked at the king. "Your father was haunted by what he did. He carried guilt like chains. It killed him. You're free of that now. You told the truth. You chose honor. You can be the king he never got to be." King William nodded. "I'm going to her grave tomorrow. Will you come with me?" "Yes," Professor Lee said. "I'd like that." Thomas watched them. A king and an old professor. Connected by tragedy, but choosing connection over hatred. Truth over secrets. Later, as Thomas did his evening rounds, he stopped by the wardrobe room. The crimson robes hung there, clean and pressed. He thought about everything that had happened. A piece of paper hidden in fabric, a curse written in grief, a truth that refused to stay buried. He thought about Li Mei, a young woman who died alone believing she didn't matter, and how now, 60 years later, millions of people knew her name, knew her story, honored her memory. "You were loved," Thomas whispered to the empty room. "Maybe not the way you deserved while you were alive, but you're loved now. You're remembered now. You matter now." The robes hung still and silent, but somehow Thomas felt like they were lighter, like some weight had been lifted from the fabric itself. He turned off the lights and left. Tomorrow, there would be more ceremonies, more official duties, more protocol and tradition. But tonight, a wrong had been righted. A secret had been freed. A curse had been broken, not by magic, not by ritual, but by the simplest and most powerful thing of all, the truth. Outside. The streets around the palace were still covered in flowers, thousands and thousands of them. All for Li Mei. All for a woman who had been invisible in life, but was unforgettable in death. People left notes with the flowers. Thomas had read some of them. Your life mattered. You were loved. We remember you. You deserved better. Rest in peace. King William had ordered that the flowers be preserved and turned into a permanent garden. The Li Mei Memorial Garden, a place of peace and remembrance. A place where anyone who had been forgotten or abandoned could come and feel seen, because that's what the curse had. It's really been about. Not death. Not revenge. Not even justice in the legal sense. It was about being seen. About mattering. About love that had nowhere to go, finding a way forward. Despite impossible odds, Li Mei had been invisible, erased, forgotten. But her brother's words, written in grief and anger 60 years ago, had reached through time to make sure she was remembered, to make sure she mattered, to make sure her death meant something, and now finally it did. The curse was broken. The truth was told. The innocent were free. And somewhere, in whatever comes after. Perhaps a young woman named Li Mei finally knew that she had been loved all along, that her life had meaning, that she was never, ever forgotten. Thomas looked up at the stars above the palace, and he smiled. Rest well, he whispered to the night. Your story is told. You can rest now. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of thousands of flowers. And for just a moment, Thomas could have sworn he felt something peace. Finally. After 60 years of waiting, there was peace.